Hey there Wargamers, Justin the Arm Painter here from Death Row Designs, and today we're going to be showing you guys how to achieve some simple effects with masking. Now if you watched our previous video on how to do hazard stripes on chainswords, this video is going to be very similar to that, but we're taking it to the next level. Today we're going to be covering masking for a second time, but with more emphasis on adding an additional layer. This is a technique you can apply to other miniatures and other effects, and simply by adding an additional layer, another one on top of another on top of another, you can get different effects. Now previously we worked with a chainsword, where we used only one piece of masking tape to wrap around the blade. We only had two colors that were actually present. Now for our particular piece we're working on today, we're going to do something that mirrors something from maybe AdMech, where they have the alternating black and yellow colors and stripes that go across the middle, and on those particular effects they generally also have kind of a white border. I'm going to show you guys how to achieve this effect today, but first we got to start by preparing the surface, and for that we're going to be using Reaper's dark brown. We're going to be laying down an area here in the middle. With our paint now mixed, we can do a quick spray on the back of our glove here. It's a good way to test for our flow, make sure the paint's mixed up the way we would like, and do a test spray on our glove before we transition over the model here. We don't want to ruin that. Now that we're comfortable with our paint mix, we can begin applying some color. It's important to focus here and make sure you're applying a nice coat of brown, but we really want to focus on the width of this. We want to make sure that there's brown in all the areas that we want to have yellow in later. Remember when you're spraying your airbrush to do thin coats here. You don't want to apply this too thick, you don't want it to run. Just want a nice thin coat. If necessary, come back for a second pass, but I find with the dark highlight from Reaper we get a nice coverage very quickly. And with a couple of passes, we now have our brown laid down. We're going to have to allow that to dry. I would like to draw some attention here, though, to the actual amount of brown we laid down. You can see it covers up almost the whole hatch. Now, later we're going to be applying some yellow and some masking, and we really want to make sure that there's enough brown there to facilitate yellow everywhere we want it. It's better to have more brown down now than to get to the yellow part of the step and then find that you don't have enough brown pre-shaded. With our hatch now dry, we're ready to go on to the next step, where we're going to try and lighten up the center here with some white. And we're going to be focusing on the center here because we want the light to radiate outwards, and that's where we're going to have a hot spot with our yellow. It's going to be very bright. You could apply some light from the top or the bottom. It doesn't really matter which direction you want that light to come from, just make sure you're very consistent. The white that we're going to be using for this step is Stynylrez Primer White from Badger. Now we're going to be applying this white here, and we're going to be trying to make sure we leave some of that brown showing through. We don't want to cover it all up. This is a pre-shading step so that we can get our yellow down later and look really nice. And you can see as I'm moving towards the center of the hatch, where we want that light to be brightest, I'm trying to be more intense. In this case, I'm also trying to follow the grooves in the teeth of this particular hatch. I'm going to leave a little bit of a transition in between the two sets of teeth if we can. It's not a big deal if you don't, as long as you get that nice gradient between the brown and the white regardless. With our initial pass of white now down, we're going to come in here, we're going to try and lighten up the center portion here of the teeth. Just kind of feather that out. Again, we really want this to be the focal point of the yellow. This is where the light source is really going to be hitting. Now this piece may look like a hot mess right now, but rest assured when we get through the next step, it's going to look real crisp, real clean, and real nice. With our white pre-shading now done, it's time to come in with our next color, and that's going to be Minotaur's Craven. And if you watched our previous tutorial on how to do hazard stripes on our chainswords, you're going to be familiar with this paint. As always, we're going to give a quick spritz to the back of our glove, make sure we've got our paint ready to go. And as we begin painting here with the airbrush, it's important to note, again, always do thin, smooth passes. Don't oversaturate one area. You don't want pooling, you don't want the paint to kind of drip or run down, so just be patient. Now one of the things I really like about using the yellow paint from Minotaur is that it's very translucent, so we're able to really exploit the pre-shading we did here. As you can see, the yellow over the white is very intense, and as it fades into the brown we get this dark brownish yellow, which is really nice. With our initial layer of Craven now dry, we're going to be coming in for a highlight across those teeth, and for that we're going to be using Craven again. Big shocker there. Mixed with a little bit of a radiated yellow in a 1-to-1 ratio. Now remember, as you go into this step here, that the whole point of it is to focus on the high points. We want to spray the areas where the white was the most intense to really push that bright yellow highlight again. So in that case, it's going to be the center of our hatch, where all the teeth are in the middle. We're going to get that nice bright spot where the light would be radiating out. If you happen to be doing your light source from one of the corners of the hatches, the same philosophies and principles would apply, but in this case, I like to radiate outwards because we're on a flat surface on top of a vehicle. While our paint's drying here, we can prepare for the next step. For that, we're going to be using some of our Tamiya masking tape here. We're going to be using it as a guide to kind of determine how thick we want our hazard stripes to be. So for that, we're going to peel off a piece of masking tape here, and we're going to apply it to the front of our shirt or the top of our jeans or something like that a few times to pull off some of that adhesiveness. With some of that adhesiveness now off, we can come in here and see how wide our stripes could be. And in this case, I think that's a little bit wide. I don't like this that much, so we're going to come in here and we're going to apply this to our cutting mat here, and we're just going to trim this down. And now essentially what we're doing here is we're preparing a guide so we can mask off later, and this is going to be the full width of our hazard stripes. And I want to make sure that we've got an area that's going to go across the teeth of this hatch that is going to be wide enough to facilitate cool looking hazard stripes, but also leave enough of a border on the edge so we can get that white border as well. Real rhyme or reason for how thick this should be, you have to determine that for yourself. When you come in with an X-Acto blade or trim, just be careful, don't hurt yourself, don't cut off those little fingers, don't draw any blood, and don't appease the blood god during this step. Corn may want blood from your enemies, but not from your hobby fingers. I'm not quite satisfied with the overall width of the tape here, so I want to come in and trim it down just a little bit more. Now again, there's no rhyme or reason to this, it's just personal preference. You know, trim to your heart's content, leave it thick, leave it thin, whatever is going to work for the particular miniature you're working on. Important thing is, we're giving you some tools that you can use on your miniatures. With that being done, compare here, looks like this width is looking real nice, lines up very well. I think the thickness is great, our hazard stripes are going to look good when we get to that step. With our first piece of masking tape now ready, we can come in here and get the masking tape prepared for our hazard stripes. For this, we're using the Tamiya masking tape. And this one's going to be the 6mm size. Going to get us a nice long strip of that. And just like with the previous step, we're going to apply this to our shirt or jeans or hoodie, whatever you may be wearing, a couple of times. Just press it down and pull it up. It's going to get some of the adhesiveness off of the tape, which is really important here. We're going to line it up with one of the guides on our cutting mat so that we can trim this down. It's important that you don't skip the step where you remove the adhesiveness though, because there's nothing worse than preparing a miniature, then doing some masking to get cool effects, and then peeling it up and ruining the miniature by pulling up the paint. When we come in to trim this top piece here, we're just going to be cutting it into small strips. Not like we did with the previous thick one. For this one, we're just going to be kind of coming in and making right around 1-inch strips here, because we're going to be using this to make our hazard stripes. This is all we're going to need for now. And with this now dry, we can start applying our masking to create our hazard stripes. I'm going to be going across the surface here, trying to get a good angle, figure out what's going to look the best. So let's peel off a piece here. And with this piece, we can determine where we want our hazard stripes to be and what angle we'd like to go for. It's important here when you're placing the piece down that you try and use some areas on the model here as a guide to kind of give you some ideas on where to place the piece and where to place the next one to get your angles consistent. It's also worth noting that everywhere you place this tape is where the yellow is actually going to be later. You're placing yellow tape down and you'll have yellow spots under it later. Now when you come in for the next pieces, make sure you space them out equally, because if you don't, the hazard stripes are going to look really weird. Now remember, we're placing these down and this is where the yellow is going to be, but all the spots that this tape is not is going to be colored black, because that's where the black stripes are going to be. So try and replicate the same angle as you move your way up this hatch, and try and get equal spacing between each piece. There we go. Just like that. If you find yourself struggling at all to place these strips down to create your hazard stripes, if it has anything to do with the actual length of the pieces of tape you're using, don't hesitate to cut some more strips. You have the right tool for the job. Hobby smarter, not harder. No shame in cutting some larger strips to make your job a little bit easier. Now we've got our guide here, just go ahead and leave that, we'll be using that later, but with our hazard stripe masking now done, it's time to come in and spray down some black, right across the center here. Now remember, all these areas in between the masking are going to be where the black hazard stripes are going to be. For the black we're going to be using today, we're going to be using Montana. Now you don't have to use this, you can use any kind of black you want. Maybe you want to use Raven black from Minotaur, or thin down some Abaddon black from Citadel, or some black from Vallejo, whatever you like, whatever you're comfortable with. We like to use this because it's really thin and very opaque. With our paint now loaded up, the only thing we need to do here is go ahead and test on the back of our glove here. Make sure we've got the consistency we want, the good flow, no airbrush cleaner stuck in there coming out first. It's better to mess up a glove here than it is to mess up the miniature. I know I keep beating a dead Tyranid with this, but I wouldn't be doing the Emperor's work if I was not really trying to explain proper technique to you guys. And as we go into paint here, we're going to make sure we're laying down thin coats, not thick, as always. We don't want to have runny paint, we don't want to have big globs or anything like that. This is particularly important to note when you're working with masking, because if you apply this too thick, not only could you get runny paint, but when you go to pull up the masking tape, you can really see where that thick paint is. If you do happen to apply this too thick, you will get some ridges here with the thick paint, but don't worry about it too much. We'll be able to fix that later with some weathering. It's so long as you're learning technique and practicing, that's what matters. With our black now applied, this is looking great, but it's going to lead us into our next step as soon as this dries. With our black layer now dry, it's time to come in here and apply some gray. We're focusing the gray on the center here, radiating outwards, trying to mirror where we placed that bright white and bright yellow previously. We want this to be nice and bright and match. For that, we're going to be using some coal from Minotaur. With our paint now prepared in our airbrush, we're going to start at the back of our glove here, as always. And then we're going to start applying the paint to the center of the hatch here. We're going to radiate outwards in kind of a circular fashion, trying to really feather. We don't want to cover all the black here. We just want to get a nice transition of gray into black and give the illusion that a light source is hitting in the center here. It looks very nice. You see how simple and fast that is. You can see the gray that's applied. It's very subtle here, but it applies a great effect. It looks real nice, and as soon as we peel off the masking tape, everything's going to come together and pop. With our black and gray now dry, we can start peeling off the masking tape here to reveal our hazard stripes. We're going to go real slow, real gently. If we did this properly, no paint is going to peel up. Oh, look at that. That looks fantastic. And you'll see me struggle here a little bit trying to get this masking tape up, and I'm going to reach for one of my hobby tools, an X-Acto knife. If you use this, just be real careful. You're trying to get the corner of the tape up. You don't want to scratch the paint. It's just another hobby tool in your tool chest. Now, as cool as these hazard stripes look, we currently have a big mess. To fix that, we're going to be using this big guide we cut earlier. It's going to be going across the whole surface here with this piece of tape. It's going to be really boxing off where those hazard stripes are going to be. It might be hard to visualize now, but once we get to the effect, it's really going to make sense. Now, it's really important here, just like with the previous step, before you apply the masking, make sure you've pulled off some of the adhesiveness, which we've already done. You want to make sure when you're applying it to this model that the paint is definitely dry. If it's not fully dry and you go to apply this, you'll regret it later on when you peel it up and mess it up. Now when you go to apply this, make sure you're trying to get it centered up as perfectly as possible. And if you've got some of the adhesiveness off of this tape, it won't be that big of a deal if you mess up. We're kind of using the guides here that are on our cutting mat to try and get a nice straight line. And once we've got it lined up here, just going to press our finger across it, get the tape down. And there we go. I think that is about as close to center as we're going to get. We got this down pretty even. Now we're going to fold this flap over the top. And given the semi-translucent nature of this tape here, you can really see where those hazard stripes are going to be. It's very nice. We're going to have a super cool effect when we go on to the next step. It's important to note that up to this point, we've essentially been building up our layers. We've started with the hazard stripes, and we're building our way outward. And it's kind of the reverse. We want to have this white border on the sides here. And if we had not done it in this order, you would have laid down the white first, and you'd have to do a whole bunch of hand painting to get these hazard stripes, or a bunch of additional masking to be able to get the same effect. But by starting with the hazard stripes first and building our way up to the white, this is where we've gotten to. For the next step, we're going to go ahead and grab some of our masking tape. This is the original thick masking tape we used, not the 6mm. We're going to apply it to our shirt or jeans or hoodie a few times to get some of that adhesiveness off. As always, we don't want the masking tape to pull paint off of our miniatures. Now, previously, with this initial piece of tape that we'd laid down, if you remember, we trimmed it a little bit. So now we've gone back to the original thickness, and if you line it up and look at it as a guide, you will see that there'll be a little bit of a hangover on the left and right. That hangover is where the white is going to be. Let's lay this off to the side here on our cutting mat. We'll come back to that later, but for now, we're going to get ready to move on to laying down some additional paints. To get these white borders here on the side, we're going to start by applying base gray from Minotaur. As always, don't forget to purge those Xenos, those Tyranids, by spraying some paint on the back of your glove first. We're going to take our base gray here once we're happy with the flow and start applying it to our miniature. Now it's important to do thin coats here. We don't want to go too quick or too thickly. Just like we mentioned in previous steps, if you do this too thick up next to the paint, you'll have a ridge where there'll be a thick paint. There'll be depth that you can physically see and feel. It's not a big deal if you happen to mess up and apply it too thick, but for doing better quality pieces in the future, applying thin coats is one way to try and practice and to up your value or the quality of your miniatures very easily. For our next step, we're going to be coming in here with some white into the center here. For that, we'll be using Montana white. You can use any white you like, but we like to use this because it's pre-thinned, goes through an airbrush very well, and it's super opaque. Alright, make sure you purge some of those hair ticks and burn the Tyranids by spraying some paint in the back of your hand here to test first. As with previous steps, we're going to be focusing this white here on the center, just like we did with the gray and the yellow when we created that bright spot. Now it's important to leave some of this base gray showing here on the edges, because the white in the center transitioning into that gray is going to create our gradient, create our light source, and the gray is going to serve as a shadow. To help ensure we keep some of that gray on the edges, we're going to start in the center here. Remember, thin coats, and we're going to feather and radiate our way outwards. Again, to reiterate, it is really important that we not cover all of this gray. Now, highlighting and shading white can be very difficult, and I find that base gray with a white paint works really, really well to give the illusion of shadow. So don't overdo it here, and don't lose that. You'll notice I'm kind of focusing on the high points of each side of these panels here, leaving a little bit of that gray in the middle to try and give the illusion of depth. I'm happy with the colors we've got down here. It's time to let this dry, clean out our airbrush, and prepare for the next step. It's important that we give the piece ample time to dry here. In this case, I think we're ready to move on to the next step. So we're going to go ahead and grab our masking here and peel that up. Now it's really important here that we make sure there's no adhesiveness on this tape. Now I know we prepared it ahead of time, but I am doing a couple more tags on my shirt here just to make sure we don't mess anything up. Now we're going to come in here and we're going to try and line this up perfectly center on the previous piece of masking we laid down. We want to have an equal amount on each side, because this is where our white borders are going to be when we get to the next step. Alright, so let's go ahead and just fold this tape over the back here, give us something to grab on to peel off later. And now we're on and prepared for the next step. So we've got this nice transition here with the grays on the edges and the whites in the center here, and that's going to aid us very well for when we lay down the next color. Now I'm going to come in here and we're going to apply a little bit of a dark color to the edges here to push the depth, but you could skip this step if you want to, and you could also apply a different color during this step if you'd like to as well. You could do blue or orange or whatever color you want, but we're going to do red because we're really going to push that AdMech color scheme. If you decide to do this part, make sure you don't go too heavy. We just want to apply a little bit of dark color here on the edge. The color you apply depends on what color you actually want to spray for the final finish. In this case, we're doing red. I'm using black to add a little bit of depth to the edges here to push that pre-shading and shadows. You could use a brown, or if you decided you wanted to, you could spray something else. That is going to better prepare the miniature for your final color. In this case, the black into gray into white transitions are going to lend themselves very well to a red finish. When painting AdMech miniatures, I like to use two paints for my surfaces. Those two paints are Nebula Red and Angelic Blood from Minotaur. These also work perfect for Blood Angels as well. During this step, we're going to start with our Angelic Blood around the edges here, leaving some of that white showing in the center. As always, we're going to purge some enemies of mankind here by spraying on the back of a glove first, making sure that we get the consistency we want. And then we're going to come in here, and as I said, we're going to start on the edges of our miniature here, applying thin coats and really trying to make sure we leave some of that lighter color towards the center. Remember, you can follow this process with any kind of color you want. Just go slow, apply thin coats, don't overdo it, don't be impatient, and again, really make sure you leave some of that lighter color showing in the center there so that you get the natural gradients and really exploit the advantages of the airbrush. With our dark areas now down, it's time to come in here with our next color, focusing on the light areas in the center here, and this is going to be our Nebula Red. Again, make sure you're applying thin coats, and especially when you're spraying up here next to this masking tape, we don't want this to be too thick. We don't want to have a weird ridge. If you happen to do that, it's okay. We can fix that later with some weathering in a future tutorial, but it's always a good practice to do multiple thin coats and try and push that quality forward. With our red layers now dry, the only thing left to do is to peel off the masking tape. So let's flip this over, grab the flaps that we folded over the back, pull this over the top, and go ever so gently and slow. And look at that. Really enjoy this step because it's like opening a gift on Christmas Day. It's so awesome when you get to the very end and you pull off the masking, because you reveal this really cool kind of hidden effect here. It looks like we also did a really good job getting the adhesiveness off the tape. We have gotten no chipped effects here, no lost paint. So this is looking really nice. Remember, you can adapt this technique to a variety of miniatures, and you can adjust the thicknesses of the different masking we did to get different effects, different styles of hazard stripes or areas on your miniatures. The sky really is the limit, so experiment with this and try it out for yourself.
Alright, with the paint now dry, I think we're going to call this piece complete. If you haven't already, we'd like to encourage you guys to like and subscribe, ding that little bell so you get alerts when we put up new content, and it's important that you do, because the next video that's going to be coming up is explaining weathering, which will be showing you guys how to take this piece to the next level. If you have any suggestions on how we can improve, make sure you sound off in the comments below. If there's any content you'd like to see us focus on or any techniques you'd like to see us showcase, let us know. We really do like interacting with you. If you happen to use any of these techniques on your miniatures, make sure you check us out on Facebook and our Facebook group, The Tap Garrison, or maybe even tag us on Instagram. We'd love to see what you guys are working on or how you take our techniques and adapt them and make them your own. If you'd like to help support the channel, make sure you check out deathraydesigns.com. Anything you do over there helps keep the lights on, helps keep me employed so I can continue to produce content for you guys. I'd like to thank you again for watching. I've really enjoyed doing these videos so far, and hopefully you've enjoyed coming along on the journey with me as well. On that note, we're going to sign off, and as always, folks, happy wargaming.